A human woman took in a baby dragon, and he became her closest companion. The rain on New Terra fell differently than it did on Earth. Each drop sparkled with tiny flecks of mineral dust that made the whole world shimmer like a jewel box. Dr. Lila Brooks pulled her jacket tighter as she climbed down into the cave system that had been calling to her for weeks. Her scanner beeped steadily as she moved deeper underground. The readings made no sense. Something down here was giving off energy signatures she had never seen before. As the head xenobiologist for the colony, she had studied hundreds of alien life forms. This was different. This felt ancient. The cave walls gleamed with strange crystals that pulsed with soft blue light. Lila had been exploring these tunnels for 3 months now, ever since the mining crew found them while digging foundations for the new housing district. The colonists wanted to fill them with concrete and forget they existed. Lila convinced them to let her study the caves first. She was glad she did. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling stretched so high her flashlight beam disappeared into darkness. Strange symbols covered the walls, carved deep into the rock and filled with the same glowing crystals. In the center of the room sat something that made her heart race, an egg. But not like any egg she had ever seen. It was almost as tall as she was, made of what looked like living crystal. Patterns of light moved across its surface like veins carrying liquid starlight. Her scanner went crazy when she pointed it at the egg. The energy readings were off the charts. Lila approached slowly. The egg was warm to the touch and she could feel a faint vibration running through it. Something was alive inside. Something big. She pulled out her communication device to call the research station. Protocol said she should report this immediately. The Galactic Council had strict rules about unknown life forms. Any discovery like this had to be turned over to their containment teams within 24 hours. But as she lifted the device, the egg began to crack. A thin line of pure white light appeared along one side. Then another. The light grew brighter as more cracks spread across the surface. Lila stepped back, her hand moving to the emergency beacon on her belt. If this thing was dangerous, she needed to call for help. The egg split open with a sound like singing crystal. What emerged was not what she expected. A small head poked out first, no bigger than her fist. It had large, intelligent eyes that shifted color from blue to green to gold. The head was followed by a long, graceful neck, then a body covered in scales that seemed to be made of liquid mercury. Tiny wings unfurled, each one decorated with patterns that looked like star maps. The creature looked at her and made a soft chirping sound. Lila forgot how to breathe. She was looking at a baby dragon. Not the fantasy creatures from old Earth stories, but something real and magnificent. The little dragon stumbled out of its shell on unsteady legs, shaking crystal dust from its wings. It looked up at her and chirped again. This time Lila felt something in her mind. Not words exactly, but feelings, curiosity, wonder, and something that felt like recognition. The dragon took a wobbly step toward her. Lila knew she should run. She should call for the containment team. She should follow every safety protocol she had ever learned. Instead, she knelt down and held out her hand. The dragon touched her fingers with its tiny snout. The moment they made contact, Lila felt a warm rush of emotion that was not her own. Joy, relief, and something that felt unmistakably like love. In that instant, she made a decision that would change everything. She scooped the little dragon into her arms. It weighed almost nothing, but she could feel the power humming just beneath its skin. The dragon settled against her chest and began to purr like a cat, but the sound had harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones. Lila looked around the ancient chamber one more time. Whatever civilization had built this place was long gone. The dragon was alone in the universe, the last of its kind. She could turn it over to the council, where it would spend its life in a cage being studied by scientists who saw it as a specimen instead of a person. Or she could take it home. The dragon looked up at her with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and Lila saw something there that made her choice easy. This was not just an animal. This was someone. She wrapped the dragon in her jacket and headed back through the tunnels. Her mind raced as she climbed toward the surface. She would have to be careful. The council had sensors that could detect unusual energy signatures. She would need to shield the dragon somehow, but first she needed to get it somewhere safe. The rain had stopped by the time she emerged from the cave. The twin suns of New Terra were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The dragon poked its head out of her jacket and looked around with wide eyes. When it saw the sky, it made a sound of pure wonder. Lila smiled for the first time in hours. Whatever happened next, she had done the right thing. She could feel it in her heart. She climbed into her research vehicle and started the drive back to her small house on the outskirts of the colony. The dragon curled up in her lap, apparently deciding she was safe. As they drove through the crystal forests of New Terra, Lila began to think of names. Ember, she decided, because of the way its scales glowed like dying coals. Little did she know that Ember would grow up to save not just her world, but the entire galaxy. All because one human woman looked into the eyes of a lost child and chose love over fear. The greatest adventures always begin with the smallest acts of kindness. By the time they reached her house, Ember was fast asleep, dreaming dragon dreams of flying among the stars. Lila carried him inside and made a soft bed for him near the fireplace. Tomorrow would bring challenges she could not imagine. Tonight she would simply be a mother to something wonderful. 6 months had changed everything in ways Lila never expected. Ember was no longer the tiny creature she could hold in her arms. He now stood as tall as her waist, his scales shifting between silver and deep blue depending on his mood. His wings had grown strong enough for short flights around her house, though he still preferred to stay close to her. The real change was not in his size. It was in his mind. Ember learned faster than any creature Lila had ever studied. He understood her language within weeks. Though he spoke through a combination of musical sounds and images he somehow placed directly into her thoughts. He could solve puzzles that stumped adult humans and had figured out how to operate every piece of technology in her house. More than once, Lila had come home to find her research equipment reassembled in ways that made it work better than before. This morning brought new worries. Her communication device buzzed with an urgent message from Colony Control. Inspector Thross of the Galactic Council's Xenological Survey Corps had arrived unannounced. He wanted to examine her research station immediately. Lila felt her stomach drop. She looked at Ember, who was currently trying to improve her coffee maker by rewiring its heating elements with his small, precise claws. "We have company coming," she told him. "You need to hide." Ember's scales turned a worried shade of gray. He understood more than he could say. Through their bond, she felt his concern mixed with determination. He would not let anything happen to her, but she could not let anything happen to him either. The hiding place they had prepared was a modified storage room beneath her house. Lila had lined it with metal sheeting that would block most energy scanners. It was not perfect, but it was the best she could do with limited resources. Ember reluctantly curled up in the hidden room. Before she closed the panel, he touched her hand with his snout. She felt a warm pulse of affection and trust that made her eyes water. "I will come back for you," she promised, "no matter what happens." 30 minutes later, Inspector Thross arrived with 2 armed guards and enough scanning equipment to examine a small moon. He was a tall, thin Centaurian with gray skin and 4 arms that moved independently of each other. His black eyes missed nothing. "Dr. Brooks," he said in the flat, emotionless way his species spoke, "I have received reports of unusual energy readings in this sector. You will cooperate with my investigation." Lila nodded and tried to look calm. "Of course, Inspector. Though I should mention that the local crystal formations can create strange scanner readings. It is a known issue." Thross ignored her explanation and began setting up his equipment. His scanners were far more advanced than anything the colony had. If Ember made the slightest sound or movement, they would detect him. For 3 hours, Thross searched every inch of her research station. He found nothing unusual in her official logs or equipment, but Lila could see the suspicion in his eyes. He knew she was hiding something. "Your recent research has focused on the cave systems," he said, studying her reports. "Yet you have filed no discovery papers. Why?" "The caves are geologically interesting but contain no significant xenological specimens," Lila lied smoothly. "Just crystal formations and some basic mineral deposits." One of Thross's scanners began beeping. He moved toward the area above Ember's hiding place. Lila's heart stopped. The scanner's beeping grew faster. Thross knelt and examined the floor more closely. His 4 hands moved over the surface, feeling for hidden panels. Then the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but all of Thross's scanning equipment had shut down. He stared at his dead instruments with confusion and growing anger. "What happened?" he demanded. "I am not sure," Lila said honestly. "Sometimes the local magnetic fields cause power fluctuations." It took Thros 2 hours to get his equipment working again. When he did, his scanners showed nothing unusual. Whatever energy signature had triggered them was gone, but Lila knew the truth. Ember had somehow interfered with the power grid to protect himself. At 6 months old, he already understood complex technology better than most adult humans. Thros left that evening, frustrated and suspicious but with no evidence. Lila waited until his transport disappeared over the horizon before opening Ember's hiding place. He emerged looking tired but proud of himself. Through their mental connection, she felt his satisfaction at solving the problem. He had learned to control his natural bioelectric field, and had used it to create an electromagnetic pulse that disabled the scanners without harming anyone. "You saved us both," she told him, scratching behind his neck ridges the way he liked. "But this is just the beginning." "They will be back." Ember's scales turned a determined shade of gold. He understood. The outside world saw him as either a threat or a resource to be controlled. But he had something they did not expect. He had Lila, and she had him. Their bond was stronger than any scanner or regulation. That night, a fierce storm struck New Terra. The winds howled around Lila's house with unusual force, and lightning split the sky in patterns she had never seen before. The colony's power grid failed completely, leaving thousands of people in darkness. Lila found Ember standing at the window, watching the storm with fascination. His scales glowed brighter than usual, pulsing in rhythm with the lightning outside. "Can you feel it?" she asked. He nodded and made a sound like singing crystal. Through their bond, she felt his excitement. The storm was not natural. Something was calling to him from the ancient places of New Terra, something that recognized what he was. When the main power station exploded in a shower of sparks visible from kilometers away, Lila made a decision. People would die without power. The hospital, the life support systems, the emergency shelters, everything depended on electricity. "Can you help them?" she asked. Ember looked at her with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Then he spread his wings and walked outside into the storm. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Ember flew to the broken power station and landed on the main transmission tower. His scales began to glow like miniature suns. Lightning struck him again and again, but instead of harming him, it seemed to energize him. He absorbed the chaotic energy of the storm and transformed it into clean, stable power. Within minutes, lights began coming back on across the colony. The hospital's emergency systems hummed back to life. Families trapped in the storm found safety. Ember had saved thousands of lives without anyone knowing it was him. He returned home exhausted but happy. Lila wrapped him in warm blankets and held him while he slept. She realized then that hiding him was not about protecting the colony from him. It was about protecting him from a galaxy that would never understand what he truly was. He was not just the last of his kind. He was something new, something that could bridge the gap between ancient power and modern need, something that could save everyone if they would let him. But first, she had to keep him safe long enough to grow into his destiny. 1 year after finding Ember, Lila watched him soar through the crystal canyons of New Terra like he had been born to fly. He was magnificent now, his wingspan nearly 20 meters wide, his scales reflecting the light of the twin suns in patterns that shifted like living art. But he was still, in many ways, her child. He still curled up next to her fireplace every night. He still brought her interesting rocks and crystal formations like a cat bringing mice. And he still had the curiosity of a youngster, which is why Lila was not entirely surprised when he discovered something that changed everything. They were exploring a new section of the cave system when it happened. Ember had been playfully chasing light patterns on the walls, his natural bioluminescence creating a game of shadows and brightness. Lila was taking measurements of the crystal formations when she heard him make an excited chirping sound. She turned to see him pawing at a section of wall that looked different from the rest. The crystals here were arranged in deliberate patterns, almost like a circuit board made of living light. "What did you find?" she asked. Ember pressed his snout against the crystal pattern. The moment he touched it, the wall came alive. Light raced through channels carved into the rock, spreading outward in a web of brilliance. The entire chamber began to glow. revealing that what Lila had thought was a natural cave was actually an enormous artificial space. The walls rose in perfect geometric curves, covered in symbols and patterns that hurt to look at directly. Then the air in the center of the chamber began to shimmer. A figure appeared, translucent, but clearly visible. It was tall and graceful, with features that were almost human but somehow more. Its skin had the same metallic sheen as Ember's scales, and when it moved, reality seemed to bend around it. The figure began to speak in a language Lila had never heard, but somehow she understood every word. "If you are seeing this, then one of us has awakened," the figure said. "I am Keeper Nyx of the Drakmari. This message is for the one who has bonded with our child." Lila felt Ember's excitement through their connection. His scales brightened to match the hologram's glow. "We were the guardians of this galaxy long before your species reached for the stars," Nyx continued. "We shaped reality itself, held back the darkness, and maintained the balance between order and chaos. But our power made us proud, and our pride made us rigid." The hologram gestured, and the walls around them filled with images. Lila saw vast cities that seemed to float in space, beings who could reshape matter with a thought, technology that looked like crystallized dreams. The universe sent the Void Devourers to restore balance. They are not evil, though their purpose seems cruel to those who face them. They consume civilizations that have become too static, too controlling. We tried to fight them with force and failed. We tried to hide from them and failed. In the end, we chose a different path. The images showed the Drakmari creating the crystal eggs, placing them in hidden sanctuaries throughout the galaxy. We placed ourselves into temporal stasis, waiting for the right moment to return. But we could not do this alone. Each of our children must bond with another being, one whose nature complements our own. Only through this bond can the true power of creation be awakened. Lila looked at Ember, understanding flooding through her mind. The bond she felt with him was not just emotional. It was something deeper, more fundamental. "Humans," Nyx said, and Lila started in surprise. "Your species was not expected, but perhaps that is why you are perfect for this task. You have the one quality we lacked, the ability to change, to grow, to adapt even when adaptation seems impossible. You refuse to accept limits others see as absolute." The hologram turned to look directly at Ember. "My child, you are not the only one. 17 others sleep in sanctuaries across the galaxy, waiting for the right partners. But time grows short. The Void Devourers have sensed the awakening. They are coming." New images filled the walls. Dark shapes moving between stars, reality cracking and breaking in their wake. Entire star systems simply ceasing to exist. The galaxy has perhaps 5 years before they arrive in force. By then, enough bonds must be formed to create a defense network. Not to fight the Devourers. Fighting them only feeds their power. Instead, you must show them something new. Show them evolution instead of stagnation. The hologram began to fade, but Nyx had one final message. "The choice is yours, bonded ones. You can hide and hope the danger passes, or you can embrace what you are meant to become. The galaxy's future depends on beings like you, those who choose connection over isolation, growth over safety." The lights dimmed, leaving Lila and Ember in the soft glow of the crystal formations. The silence felt heavy with possibility and terror. Ember moved to her side and gently butted his head against her shoulder. Through their bond, she felt his resolve. He understood what they had learned, and he was not afraid. If anything, he was excited by the challenge. Lila thought about her quiet life as a research scientist. She had never wanted to be a hero or save the galaxy. She had just wanted to understand the universe and maybe help her colony prosper. But looking at Ember, she realized that sometimes the most important choices are the ones you never plan to make. 17 others, she said aloud. "We need to find them before the council does. Before anyone else decides they know what is best for beings they do not understand." Ember made a sound of agreement. His scales shifted to show patterns of light that looked like star maps. He was already thinking about the journey ahead. Lila pulled out her communication device and stared at it for a long moment. She could report what they had discovered, turn it over to the proper authorities and let them handle the cosmic threat, or she could trust in the bond that had changed her life. She turned off the device and slipped it into her pack. Whatever came next, she and Ember would face it together, just like they had faced everything else, with love, determination, and the uniquely human refusal to accept that some problems are too big to solve. The galaxy might depend on ancient powers and cosmic forces, but those forces had chosen to work through something simpler and stronger. They had chosen to work through the bond between two beings who saw each other not as alien species, but as family. Ember spread his wings and looked toward the cave entrance. Beyond it lay a galaxy full of dangers and wonders, sleeping dragons and cosmic threats. But first they had to get home. They had preparations to make and a future to save. The adventure was just beginning. 2 years had passed since the hologram of Keeper Nyx revealed the truth about the Drachmarie. Ember was now the size of a small building, his presence impossible to hide from the advanced sensors that constantly swept the galaxy. Lila had known this day would come, but she still felt her heart race as the Council fleet descended from the stars. Admiral Corvin's flagship, the Iron Judgment, blocked out the sun as it settled into orbit around New Terra. The massive warship bristled with weapons designed to crack planets, and its escort fleet filled the sky like metal storm clouds. This was not a diplomatic visit. Lila stood in her garden watching the dropships descend toward the colony. Ember lay beside her, his massive form coiled protectively around the small house where their journey had begun. His scales reflected the alien ships in patterns that looked almost defiant. "Are you ready?" she asked him quietly. Ember's response came not in words but in feelings. Calm determination mixed with fierce protectiveness. He was afraid, but not for himself. He feared what might happen to her when the galaxy learned their secret. The first soldiers to reach her home were human colonists from the Defense Force, their faces grim with duty and apology. Behind them came beings from a dozen different species, all wearing the blue and silver of the Galactic Council's military arm. Admiral Corvin himself was a hegemony Vorthan, a species that looked like walking mountains made of living metal. His 4 eyes glowed red as he studied Ember with obvious hunger. To him, the dragon represented either a weapon to be claimed or a threat to be destroyed. "Dr. Lila Brooks," Corvin said, his voice like grinding stone. "By order of the Galactic Council, you and the entity known as Ember will come with us immediately. Any resistance will be met with appropriate force." Lila stepped forward, placing herself between the soldiers and Ember. "He is not an entity. He has a name and he is under my protection." Corvin's laugh was like an avalanche. "Your protection? Human. You have been harboring the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. The energy signatures we detected from this system could power entire civilizations. That thing could destroy star systems with a thought." "That thing," Lila said firmly, "has never harmed anyone. He saved this colony from a power failure that would have killed thousands. He is not your enemy." The Admiral was not interested in debate. He raised one massive hand and stun weapons appeared in the grip of every soldier present. But before anyone could fire, Ember moved. He did not attack. Instead, he simply stood up. The sight of a fully grown Drachmarie rising to his full height was something that no amount of sensor readings could have prepared the soldiers for. Ember towered above them all, his wings casting shadows that seemed to bend light itself. His scales shifted through colors that had no names, and the air around him hummed with barely contained power. But it was his eyes that made the difference. Ancient, intelligent, and infinitely patient. These were not the eyes of a beast or a weapon. They were the eyes of someone who had seen the birth and death of civilizations and still chose to be gentle. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Admiral Corvin was less impressed. "Psychological manipulation," he snarled. "The creature is using some form of mental control. Deploy the neural dampeners." The soldiers reluctantly began setting up equipment designed to block telepathic influence, but Lila knew they were wasting their time. Ember was not controlling anyone's mind. He was simply being himself, and that was enough to show others what he truly was. The transport to the council chambers took 3 days, during which Lila and Ember were kept in a specialized containment bay that could supposedly hold beings capable of manipulating reality. The irony was not lost on Lila, that the most secure prison in the galaxy felt like a luxury hotel compared to the small storage room where Ember had hidden during his first year. The Galactic Council met in a space station that was itself a small world, built in the void between solar systems to ensure neutrality. Representatives from 400 species gathered in the vast circular chamber to decide the fate of 2 beings who had never asked to be judged. The trial began with testimony from Inspector Thross, who detailed every regulation Lila had violated by concealing Ember's existence. The charges included endangering galactic security, violation of xenological protocols, and harboring an unregistered sentient entity. Then came the real reason for the trial. Council historian Vel spoke in the emotionless tone of her species as she revealed what their archives contained about the Drakmari. The Drakmari Empire controlled this galaxy for over 10 million years, she said. Their power was absolute. They could reshape matter at the quantum level, manipulate space and time, and influence the fundamental forces of physics. Their civilization ended mysteriously 5 million years ago, leaving behind only legends and ruins. The chamber filled with fearful murmurs. Representatives who had seemed merely curious now looked at Ember with obvious terror. If this creature is indeed a Drakmari, Vel continued, then its potential threat level exceeds our ability to measure. A single adult Drakmari could theoretically destroy our entire civilization. Admiral Corvin stepped forward, his weapon systems charging visibly. The solution is obvious. We destroy the creature before it can mature fully. We cannot take the risk. That was when Ember chose to speak. He had never addressed anyone except Lila directly, but now his voice filled the chamber. It was not heard through ears but felt directly in the mind, a sound like music made from the language of creation itself. I am Ember, he said simply. I am the last of the Drakmari, and I do not wish to rule anyone. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the translation devices stopped working, overloaded by attempting to process a language that predated most civilizations. I know what my people became, Ember continued. They forgot that power without compassion is just another form of destruction. They tried to control the universe instead of nurturing it. That is why the Void Devourers came. Panic erupted at the mention of the Devourers. These were creatures of nightmare, mentioned in the oldest myths as harbingers of the end of existence. They are coming again, Ember said, his mental voice cutting through the chaos. They are coming because the galaxy has grown stagnant, ruled by fear and regulations that prevent growth and change. But there is another way. He turned his great head toward Lila, who stood in the defendant's box looking small and fragile compared to the beings around her. My bond with Lila Brooks represents something my people never understood. True partnership between different forms of life. Not domination or control, but cooperation and mutual growth. This is what can save the galaxy from the Devourers. Before anyone could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red as automated systems detected something approaching from deep space. On the massive view screens, they saw it. A probe the size of a moon, black as the void between stars, moving at impossible speed toward the galactic core. Where it passed, space itself seemed to crack and heal, leaving behind areas where the laws of physics no longer applied. Void Devourer Scout, Admiral Corvin said, his voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? They are not supposed to return for thousands of years. Ember rose from the defendant's platform, his scales brightening to match the emergency lights. They are drawn by stagnation and fear. This trial, this desire to destroy rather than understand, it calls to them like a beacon. The probe launched tendrils of darkness toward inhabited systems. Wherever they touched, planets simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, erased as if they had never been. I can stop it, Ember said, his mental voice now urgent. But I cannot do it alone. I need my bond with Lila to focus the power properly. I need her uniquely human ability to find solutions that should not exist. The council chamber erupted in argument. Some demanded Ember be released immediately. Others insisted he was somehow responsible for the probe's arrival. Admiral Corvin's faction wanted to execute them both rather than take the risk of trusting an alien power. But while they argued, Lila walked across the chamber to stand beside Ember. She placed her small human hand on his massive snout, and the bond between them flared to life in a way that every being present could feel. We can discuss politics later, she said calmly. Right now people are dying. Let us save them, and then you can decide whether we are heroes or criminals. Ember's agreement rumbled through the station's superstructure. Together they turned toward the view screen showing the approaching probe. The galaxy was about to discover what a human woman and her dragon could accomplish when they worked as one. 3 years had passed since Ember's battle with the Void Devourer probe shook the galaxy to its core. The probe had been destroyed, but not before it transmitted the location of every major civilization back to its masters in the dark between stars. The countdown to invasion had begun. Lila stood on the observation deck of Sanctuary Station, a massive construction built from the combined resources of dozens of species. Through the reinforced windows, she watched human engineers working alongside Centaurian technicians and Vorthon warriors to install weapons that had been designed in the dreams of sleeping. Drakmari humanity had surprised everyone by becoming the backbone of the resistance. While other species had responded to the crisis with committees and protocols, humans had responded with action. They had volunteered for dangerous missions, adapted alien technology faster than anyone thought possible, and somehow learned to interface with Drakmari artifacts that had rejected every other species for millions of years. "The fleet reports are ready," said Captain David Chen, approaching with a tablet full of data. He was one of the first humans to successfully bond with a Drakmari construct, though his partnership was with a crystal AI rather than a living dragon. "We have 47 functional ships with Drakmari hybrid drives, and 300 more in various stages of conversion." Lila nodded, but her attention was focused on the deeper space sensors. The Void Devourers were still 6 months away, but their influence was already being felt. Reality storms had begun appearing at the edges of inhabited space, areas where the fundamental laws of physics broke down completely. "It will not be enough," she said quietly. Ember's massive presence filled her mind with warmth and determination. He was currently in the station's core, working with the other awakened Drakmari to create the quantum resonance field that would protect their fleet from reality distortion. Of the 17 sleeping dragons mentioned by Keeper Nix, they had found and awakened 12. Each one had bonded with a human partner, and each partnership had created capabilities that surprised even the ancient Drakmari archives. But 12 dragons, even with human partners, could not defend an entire galaxy. "Dr. Brooks," came a familiar voice behind her. She turned to see Inspector Thross, the Centaurian who had once hunted for evidence of Ember's existence. He looked older now, his gray skin marked with lines of stress and worry. "The Council has reached a decision regarding the Eternal Bond Protocol." Lila felt her stomach tighten. The Eternal Bond was the last resort mentioned in the Drakmari archives, a permanent merger between dragon and partner that would create a new form of consciousness, capable of reshaping reality on a galactic scale. The process had never been attempted across species, and the archives warned that failure meant the death of both participants. "They are forbidding it," Thross said, his forehands moving in a gesture of regret. "The risk is considered too great. If you and Ember died in the attempt, we would lose our most powerful defenders. And if we do not attempt it," Lila replied, "everyone dies anyway. The Void Devourers are not coming to conquer. They are coming to reset reality itself. They will unmake everything we have built." Through their bond, she felt Ember's agreement. He had been studying the probe's data signature, learning how the Devourers operated. What he had discovered was worse than anyone imagined. The Devourers were not evil. They were the universe's immune system, designed to eliminate civilizations that had become too rigid and controlling. The Drakmari had triggered their attention by trying to impose absolute order on chaos. Now the current galactic civilization was making the same mistake. "There is another way," Thross said hesitantly. "Admiral Corvin has proposed using the Drakmari artifacts as weapons, convert them into planet killers and use them to destroy the Devourers before they can establish a foothold in our reality." Lila closed her eyes. The same thinking that had doomed the original Drakmari civilization. Meet force with force, control with greater control. It would not work, and the attempt would only make the Devourers stronger. "That is exactly what they expect us to do," she said. "The Devourers feed on stagnation and fear. Every weapon we build in desperation makes them more powerful." An alarm echoed through the station, followed by an announcement that made everyone's blood freeze. Long-range sensors had detected the advanced scouts of the Devourer fleet. They were moving faster than predicted, consuming empty star systems to fuel their approach. The invasion would begin in 3 months, not 6. Lila ran to the command center where displays showed the approaching horror. Dark shapes larger than moons, moving through space like living shadows. Where they passed, stars went out and galaxies aged billions of years in moments. "How many?" she asked. 700 confirmed contacts, reported the sensor officer, a young human whose hands shook as she read the data, possibly thousands more behind them. They are not just ships. They are reality distortion fields with consciousness. Ember's presence pressed against Lila's mind, filled with urgent need. Through their bond, she felt his certainty. The eternal bond was their only chance, regardless of what the council decided. But they had to attempt it now, before the Devourers arrived and made the process impossible. "Tell the council their decision has been noted," Lila said to Thros. Then she turned to Captain Chen. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel from the core sections. What we are about to attempt will either save the galaxy or destroy this station." Thros's black eyes widened. "You cannot disobey a direct order from the council." The penalties do not matter if everyone is dead," Lila interrupted. "Ember and I did not ask to be the galaxy's last hope, but that is what we have become. The universe chose us for this, and we will not let fear make us abandon our responsibility." She left the command center and walked through corridors filled with beings from hundreds of worlds, all working together in desperate hope. Humans shared technical data with species they had never met. Ancient enemies collaborated on weapons designs. Children played games that mixed the traditions of dozens of cultures. This was what the universe was supposed to be, not the rigid hierarchies and careful protocols of the current galactic civilization, but a chaotic, beautiful mixture of different forms of life growing and changing together. This was what she and Ember would die to protect. She reached the core chamber where Ember waited, his massive form surrounded by crystalline interfaces that looked like frozen music. The other awakened Drakmari were there too, with their human partners, all of them understanding what was about to happen. "Are you ready?" she asked Ember, placing her hand on the warm metal of his snout. His response came not in words but in absolute certainty. They had been ready for this since the moment they first touched in that ancient cave. Everything else had just been preparation. The eternal bond ritual required them to surrender every barrier between their consciousness, to become something entirely new while remaining themselves. The Drakmari archives warned that most beings could not survive the process of having their identity merged with another. But humans were different. Humans had always been good at becoming more than they were while staying true to who they started as. Lila climbed onto Ember's back and settled into the neural interface crown that would link their minds completely. Around them, the other dragons began to sing, their voices creating harmonics that made reality itself more flexible. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we do this together." The merger began and the universe held its breath. The Void Devourers arrived like a tide of living darkness, their reality-eating ships emerging from the spaces between dimensions where normal physics feared to go. They came not as conquerors but as harvesters, ready to consume a galaxy that had grown too rigid and fearful to continue evolving. Lila Ember watched them approach from the bridge of humanity's last hope, a massive world ship built from crystallized Drakmari dreams and human determination. The eternal bond had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, creating not just a merged consciousness but something entirely new. They were still Lila, still Ember, but they were also something that had never existed before in the universe's long history. They could feel every living thing in the galaxy through their expanded awareness. Billions of beings huddled in shelters, praying to their various gods for salvation. Entire species that had spent centuries barely tolerating each other now worked side by side, united by the simple desire to continue existing. The irony was not lost on them. The approach of ultimate destruction had finally accomplished what millions of years of diplomacy could not. It had made the galaxy truly alive. "Contact in 7 minutes," reported Admiral Corvin from his position at the tactical station. The Vorthon warrior had become an unlikely ally once he understood that traditional weapons were useless against enemies that could simply erase the concepts that made weapons possible. Lila Ember nodded with a movement that was both human gesture and dragon acknowledgement. Around them, the bridge crew represented every major species in the galaxy, all of them volunteers who had chosen to face the end rather than hide from it. "Signal the fleet," they said, their voice carrying harmonics that resonated in both sound and thought. "Begin the convergence pattern. Remember, we are not here to fight. We are here to show them something new. The human fleet, enhanced with Drakmari technology and crewed by beings who had learned to work as one people rather than separate species, moved into formation around the world ship. Each vessel hummed with hybrid energy systems that merged human creativity with ancient power. But the real weapon was not the ships or their crews. It was the bond network that connected every awakened Drakmari with their human partners, creating a web of consciousness that spanned half the galaxy. Through this network, Lila Ember could feel the hopes and dreams of countless beings, all of them adding their strength to what was about to happen. The Void Devourers struck first, as they always did. Reality began to unravel at the edges of the engagement zone. Stars aged and died in moments. Planets lost coherence and became probability clouds. The very concepts of distance and time started to break down. This was how the Devourers killed civilizations, not through violence, but by making the universe too chaotic for organized life to exist. But instead of fighting the chaos, Lila Ember embraced it. They reached out through their bond network and connected with every consciousness in the fleet. Human adaptability flowed through Drakmari power channels, creating patterns that should not have been possible. Where the Devourers brought destructive chaos, the bond network brought creative chaos, change that built instead of destroying. The first Devourer ship to encounter this new form of reality stopped its advance. For the first time in cosmic ages, it had found something it could not simply unmake. The chaotic creativity of the bond network matched its own power to alter reality, but instead of canceling each other out, they began to resonate. Through their expanded consciousness, Lila Ember felt the confusion of the Devourer entities. They had been designed to eliminate stagnant civilizations, but this galaxy was not stagnant anymore. It was growing, changing, evolving even in the face of total annihilation. More Devourer ships arrived, their reality-warping weapons targeting the world ship. But each attack was met not with resistance but with transformation. Human engineers found ways to turn probability distortions into new forms of energy. Drakmari power systems adapted to reality fluctuations and used them to become stronger. The galaxy was proving that it could change faster than the Devourers could destroy it. "They are trying to communicate," reported the communications officer, a human woman whose neural implants allowed her to translate concepts that existed outside normal language. "The lead entity wants to understand what we are." Lila Ember opened a channel, projecting their consciousness directly toward the Devourer fleet. What they sent was not words or images, but pure experience. The memory of a human woman finding a lost dragon child and choosing love over fear. The bond that had grown between them. The way that bond had inspired an entire galaxy to become something greater than the sum of its parts. The response came as a wave of ancient confusion, mixed with something that might have been wonder. The Devourers had spent eons eliminating civilizations that had become too rigid to grow. They had never encountered one that actively embraced change, that saw chaos not as destruction but as opportunity. Through the communication link, Lila Ember felt the true nature of the Devourers. They were not monsters. They were gardeners, pruning the universe to prevent it from becoming static and lifeless. But they had been doing their job for so long that they had forgotten there might be other ways to encourage growth. "Show us," came the response, a concept that bypassed language entirely. What followed was not a battle but a collaboration unlike anything the universe had ever seen. The Devourers began to share their reality-shaping techniques, while the bond network showed them how creative chaos could build, instead of destroy. Human imagination merged with Drakmari power and Devourer wisdom, creating possibilities that none of them could have achieved alone. Star systems that had been destroyed were not just rebuilt, but reimagined. Planets became gardens where multiple forms of physics could coexist. Space itself became more flexible, allowing civilizations to grow in directions that had previously been impossible. The galaxy was transforming into something unprecedented, a realm where order and chaos existed in perfect balance, where different forms of reality could overlap without destroying each other. Months later, Lila Ember stood in the observation dome of Sanctuary Station, watching ships from 1,000 worlds dock at the expanded facility. The station had become a meeting place for beings who were still learning how to exist in a universe where the impossible had become routine. Children played in zero-gravity chambers where the laws of physics changed based on their imagination. Scientists studied phenomena that redefined what science could be. Artists created works that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Void Devourers had integrated themselves into galactic society, becoming teachers and guides rather than destroyers. They helped civilizations learn to change and grow instead of trying to eliminate them when they became stagnant. But the real miracle was simpler than any of the cosmic wonders surrounding them. It was the sight of beings from hundreds of different worlds working together, not because they were forced to, but because they had learned that cooperation made them all stronger. "Do you ever miss it?" Lila asked through their merged consciousness. "Being separate?" Ember's response came as warm amusement mixed with absolute contentment. They were still themselves, still the woman who had chosen to save a lost child and the dragon who had learned what love meant. But they were also something new, something that proved the universe's greatest strength lay not in power or knowledge, but in the willingness to become more than you were. The story of Lila Brooks and Ember had become legend throughout the galaxy, proof that the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that sometimes the best way to save the universe is simply to care about someone other than yourself. In the end, humanity's gift to the galaxy was not their technology or their adaptability, though both were remarkable. It was their ability to form bonds that transcended species, philosophy, and even the fundamental nature of existence itself. The last light of the old galaxy had become the first dawn of something infinitely better, a universe where growing together was more important than standing alone, where change was celebrated rather than feared, and where the bond between two unlikely friends had shown everyone what was possible when love was stronger than fear.